Greetings, humans of the Office of Naval Intelligence's Diplomatic Corps. This is Nakai Vodar, Kaidan of Vodar Keep, and member of the Grand Council of Kaidans. In the wake of the fall of the tyrant, your Cortana, the Arbiter has expressed a newfound desire to renew our joint intelligence exchange. And with the collapse of her vast empire, her created, the myriad of Covenant Remnant factions are sure to emerge from the shadows, no longer afraid of the wrath of her guardians. With this in mind, I have taken the liberty of compiling a well-documented account on the infrastructure of the old Covenant's military, as well as every known rank, title, and station for each of its races, for many of its remnant factions still cling to the old ways. And with the rise of many of these splinter states, these warlords have adopted newer titles that suit their own vanity. With the able assistance of our spies, informers, and what records we were able to obtain from High Charity's database before its destruction, I have been able to list out all the ranks and stations in such a way that no study master could hope to match. The list is admittedly long, incomplete, and rife with certain contradictions. Yet none can doubt that this is the definitive compilation of all Covenant stations, both old and new. And it would be reminiscent of me if I did not also include the places of prominence in the societies of each of the former Covenant's client species. Perhaps this will aid in forging better ties with some of these races. And if not, well, it is better to know thy enemy before facing him in battle. So, without further delays, here follows an account of the Covenant military in all of its entirety. When discussing the Covenant's military, there is one thing that must be known. Despite the sheer immensity in its size and its seeming uniformity, the old empire lacked a true standing military, unlike that of your own. Instead, it was possessed by an extensive variety of martial organizations under the control or influence of one or more of the many ministries of High Charity. These semi-autonomous military bodies, each containing many thousands of warriors and dozens of warships, were often rivals at best. But they all abided by the ruling of the High Prophets and the High Council with unquestioning adherence. Though the Covenant military seemed a force of overwhelming unanimity to their adversities, within it, many vied against one another for power or glory. While its fleets had the capacity to bring ruin to entire star systems, it has only disguised the internal conflict beneath the surface. This underlying mutual disdain and distrust has only served your kind well during the War of Annihilation, and us ill. Within the fleets of the Old Covenant, many flotillas served a plethora of purposes and roles, both before and during the war. However, there were two distinctive types of fleets that were brought about at the whim and pleasure of the prophets: ministry fleets and high fleets. High fleets were assembled by direct order of the High Council and had wide-ranging responsibilities for locating Forerunner sites and pursuing clues related to the location of the sacred rings far beyond the reaches of Covenant space. To the ignorant eye, it would have been perceived as a great honor, but in truth, they were used to contain many powerful, charismatic Sangheili who were exiled from any position of influence, thereby removing any threats to the hierarchy. The leaders of these fleets held numerous ceremonial titles and names, but their legacies were reduced to hunting for treasures at the periphery of the Empire. In contrast, the vast majority of the Covenant's military organization was distributed amongst its many ministry fleets. Each of these fleets were led by a supreme commander, a fleet master who was equipped to service his own ship through both political machinations and military expediency. This form of command was deemed by your kind as inefficient, but it was practical, given the huge variation in Imperial needs throughout Covenant space. The power wielded by these supreme commanders was at times tempered by the presence of a minor prophet, religious officials who served as advisors in matters of faith, but came to hold great power during the war with humanity through their direct communications to the hierarchs. Beyond this structure, there were no specific orders of battle or assignment, only the will and prejudices of those in authority. Whenever these fleets choose to bring battle upon the surface of an enemy world, they would unleash the legions of ground forces under its command. The military organization of the Covenant's ground forces was highly flexible, task-oriented system that was well adopted to making war with multi-species compositions backed by space-capable warships. In truth, there was no practical distinction between space and ground forces, and all were unified under the control of overseeing operations. Ground troops were effectively organized, but command of such a force was highly decentralized. Local commanders could exercise any missions they saw fit, with whatever force they could muster, so long as they ultimately met broad objectives laid down by their superiors. The Covenant attached many discrete terminologies to their ground operational units in order to express function and specificity. The smallest of these groupings were the levies. A single levy composed of 3 low-ranking Unggoy soldiers. In combat, vast numbers of ill-trained levies were used for frontline battle, as well as various menial roles. Levies would at times be organized into demi-lances under the command of their Sangheili overseers. Demi-lances were a small grouping of warriors who would operate independently. These would be reserved for specialists or detachments under the command of a Sangheili minor, being tested for further advancement through the ranks of leadership. Above them are the lances. A lance was a grouping of low-ranking and low-caste warriors, led by an officer, be they Sangheili or Jiralhanae. A lance is roughly the equivalent to a human fire team in terms of composition. A far less common grouping of warriors was known as a point. These were small detachments of specialists not under the command of an officer. They were mostly tasked with electronic warfare, reconnaissance, and communication proxies. For any aerial formations that may operate during planetary engagements, any flight formation are known as a Talon. These Talons comprise of 1 to 5 Covenant strikecraft or dropships making intrusions along a planet's surface. Returning to the ground, larger lances, known as files, are known to compile more warriors to their number, matching that of a squad, as your military calls it. In the Covenant usage, a file refers to any large detachment of troops operating under the oversight of a leader, those typically of high station. Within larger groupings of warriors, however, are the legions. These are combined arms forces, usually encompassing all warriors and vehicle deployments to any specific region. As a practical matter, ships of cruiser size and above deploy their forces as 2 or more legions, each of whom are under the command of a high-ranking general. One distinctive type of legion are the warrior Kresh. A warrior creche are staffed by younger warriors, ever eager for distinction in combat. Warrior creche are carried aboard Covenant fleets, should the need arise. But by far the most formidable ground formation are that of the War Host. These are a temporary grouping of warriors, specialists, and officers tasked with a specific goal. They are typically mixed with all tools of warfare, from infantry, armor, and aircraft. Less well known, but no less deadly, are the groupings known as chapters. Chapters are a group of zealots who have joined a war fleet. These vary greatly in size, from half a dozen battle-scarred veterans to hundreds of newly inducted initiates. Zealots of these chapters answer to none but the Fleet Master. Elsewhere, I shall endeavor to explore more of the zealots in due time. Akaid was another such military unit within the Covenant. It is what you humans would call a company, crossed with a pact of bloodthirsty warriors. Those assigned to Akaid were outfitted with their own unique armor and utilized their own battlenet for communications. In the early cycles of the war, First Blade Tal Zatalai formed his own Kaid, who would come to be called the Bloodstars, but I shall relate that in due time. The rank and role composition of each individual Covenant soldier was enigmatic to outsiders, but it is easier to identify on the battlefield because of the segregation of forces almost exclusively by species. While there were common variations to this theme, such cross-species units defined by their immediate operations, even then, clear stratification was always visibly present. The authority and veterancy of a unit could often be discerned through the color of their armor, but this varied between species and lacked comprehensive uniformity, changing between ministry commissions and even individual fleets. The Covenant's unified ranks, which spanned the entire Empire, were held by all species at the lowest level, while its upper level consisted only of Sangheili. We shall begin with the ranks of the lowest caste within the Old Covenant, the Unggoy, a timid race known to you humans as grunts. In the beginning, the Unggoy were never integrated into the ranks of the Covenant military when their species was brought into the fold. They were simply laborers, slaves who lived and died at our pleasure. But after the Unggoy rebellion, it was through the offices of the Arbiter, Heki-Gabadi, that the grunts were given the honor of standing alongside the Sangheili in battle. Since then, the Unggoy have carried out many of the logistical and labor tasks of the Covenant war machine, in addition to serving in commanding, specialized, and spiritual roles. The lowest rank an Unggoy is given is minor. They serve purely as cannon fodder on the front lines of war, easily expendable and ever proliferating given the frequency of their birthing rates. They sport the weakest weapons in our arsenal, from plasma pistols to needlers, though at times they would be given fuel rod cannons to wreak havoc upon the enemy. Above them are the Majors. Unggoy Majors held slightly more power than their weaker counterparts in strength, intelligence, leadership, and morale. They were more courageous as well, often staying to fight under the conditions that would make their lesser brethren flee. They would command their underlings in battle, and at times lead entire lances should their superiors all perish in the fighting. But in truth, these higher-ranking Unggoy held no sway over the other forces in Covenant society, save curiously for some low-ranking Yanme'e drones from time to time. Mainline Unggoy infantry in the service of both the Covenant and its splinter factions would employ suicide attacks as a final act of desperation, often upon the death of their superior officers. Specific Unggoy squads, however, were tasked solely with such tactics in mind. These suicide squads either used plasma grenades or were fitted with a special plasma-ignited methane tank to their harnesses, for the sole purpose of igniting them near opposing forces and structures, to topple them into rubble, paving the way towards the path of victory. Next after them are the heavy class of Unggoy. These heavies are composed of experienced, skilled, and formidable warriors capable of varieties of combat, which they served as heavy weapons experts and are designed for combat support, ground assault, defense, recon, boarding, as well as the use of heavy weapons, turrets, and some vehicles. Unggoy heavies have been used to engage high-tier enemies through the use of their augmented armor and explosives such as portable plasma turrets and shade emplacements. But perhaps the most noted trademark of an Unggoy heavy is the fuel rod cannons they favor so much, making encounters with just one potentially dangerous. It is for those reasons that they remain in use by Covenant warlords today. Jiralhane's forces use them in much the same manner, albeit in a more advanced harness with varying color variations. On the battlefield, there have been certain classes of grunts who were chosen for specialized roles. One such are the Storm. Now, despite them being most prominent in the ranks of the Covenant Remnants, they were originally founded by the Old Empire during the height of its power. The original Unggoy Storm were shock troopers standing alongside their Sangheili counterparts in the most daring engagements throughout the war. But following the Prophet's downfall, they have largely filled in the role of the miners in the armies of Jiralhanae and that of the Swords of Sanghelios. Another specialized role is the Grunt Jockey. These Unggoy operate the imposing Panap pattern battlesuit, what you call goblins. Protected by strong energy shields and thick plates of armor, the jockeys use the goblins' double-barrel needle cannons, shard storm launchers, and grenade launchers to defeat any foe foolish enough to face them in battle. Moving beyond them are the Spec Ops grunts. Unggoy of this rank are part of the Special Operations Division of the Covenant. Normally, Unggoy are poorly trained in combat and are usually deployed in mass numbers as little more than cannon fodder. But if they are given proper training, they can acquire specialized roles and provide excellent support to special operations teams. Often standard infantry Unggoy find themselves promoted to this rank when their commanding Sangheili is folded into the Special Operations Division. These are highly trained Unggoy and can only be commanded by a skilled Special Operations Sangheili officer. They don unique combat harnesses, which shares the colors of their Sangheili masters. Black as obsidian. Tougher, smarter, and more aggressive than that of their lesser brethren, Special Operations grunts are often deployed with their Sangheili officers, and at times be led by higher-ranking Unggoy. These resilient, loyal, and dangerous operatives are not to be underestimated by any measure. If their commanding Sangheili officer is killed, a Special Operations grunt will seek a bloody revenge more often than not. They are also much more accurate than their counterparts, and their armor is much more resilient to damage than other Unggoy ranks. They were held in a great amount of respect for a member of their race, and few would dare to awaken their wrath. But the most daring are conscripted into the ranks of the Rangers. These specialists are fully trained and equipped for zero-G environments and boarding actions against enemy platforms, with engagement suits designed to withstand extreme temperatures, low to zero-G gravity, and other rigors found in the vacuum of space. This role is fully capable of EVA combat. In accordance with long-standing Covenant protocols, Unggoy Rangers can also be deployed to terrestrial environments, where the terrain is unsuitable to traverse for other infantry. After the Empire's fall, Jiralhanae adopted them into his upstart Covenant until it fell many cycles ago. Less well known, but no less important, are the grunts assigned to the Ministry of Tranquility, tasked with recovering sacred relics as well as exploring the borders of Covenant space as well as other missionary affairs. But one unit, led by 3rd Commander Sessarafume, revolted against the rule of the High Council, and the grunts who followed him became known as heretic grunts. They functioned in much the same way as their Covenant counterparts until they were all wiped out by the Arbiter when the Prophets ordered their extermination. The highest station an Unggoy can attain in military service are the Ultras. These Unggoy, much like their lower-ranking cousins, appeared in groups. Their harnesses can vary in appearance, but all were clad in the pure white colors of their Evocati superiors. They are very intelligent, making as few tactical errors as their Sangheili officers, although this does not make them entirely perfect. They display even more bravery in combat than any other Unggoy, and are more often used for specialized attacks rather than standard military engagements. Unggoy Ultras can at times be seen commanding groups of lower-caste Unggoy in battle, and are even seen leading other Spec Ops grunts. And yet, they lack any real authority over the other races of the Covenant. And with the collapse of the hegemony, they were incorporated by several of the warring factions of the post-Covenant era, most notably in the ranks of the Banished. In certain cases, the Unggoy can at times prove particularly pious and resourceful, and were known to serve as seer proxies, like deacons. Deacons were the lowest ranked within the Old Covenant's ministries, but it was the only position open to an Unggoy and one of the few occupations they could obtain that did not involve hard labor or military service. Most Unggoy were not considered qualified for deaconship, and those who were selected to the office were only chosen due to their intelligence and their ability to understand the Covenant's holy writs and help explain these laws to other members of the Covenant. A deacon was expected to be familiar with every sin and to have full knowledge of the punishments for every transgression. They also familiarized themselves with the luminations depicted by luminaries as well as their meaning. Those Unggoy selected for deaconship went through an educational course and training voyages at the Ministry of Tranquility sites. Deacons in training were educated by Sanshun priests at these holy sites. They shared a dormitory, a crowd warren of low-lit cells deep in the base of the ministry's tower on High Charity. Deacons were attached to most expeditionary elements within the Ministry of Tranquility, often to ensure their Kig-Yar crews remain in line, and it was their responsibility to ensure that all Covenant members remain pious and virtuous in their calling, as well as provide sermons to the crew. However, due to their low standing within the Covenant, most deacons were ignored by their peers, and their authority rendered meaningless. It was because of these difficulties that Unggoy who held this office often met with unfortunate accidents. When a vessel discovers an unknown installation or ship, it was the deacon's duty to supervise the search, or at least provide a blessing for any potential Forerunner artifact. These Unggoy were garbed in orange tunics embellished with yellow, circular symbols. After the fall of the Covenant, the deaconship was all but abandoned by the grunts, for its office was rendered meaningless without the holy protections that came with it. After the war and the sundering of the hegemony, the splinter states that laid claim to the Covenant's mantle created new offices for the grunts, some of which grants them even more power than they ever had before during the reign of the Prophets. Within Jiralhanae's Ghost of a Covenant, the the grunts were given even more authority over his forces, sometimes even commanding over his own Sangheili warriors, though this was a rare exception to the rule. Under the reign of the Hand of the Didact, the position of Imperial Grunt was fashioned as the highest Unggoy post within his army. This position was filled by many veterans from the war, many of whom possessed the ability and wisdom of combat. They commanded over groups of Unggoy storm into battle and were sometimes accompanied by a heavy grunt who served as a bodyguard. If any of them survived the Battle of Sunayon, they would be wise to forsake such a title if they wished to live. Within the Swords of Sanghelios, we have likewise granted new honors upon the grunts who fight for Sangheili sovereignty, but unlike Umdama's lot, we grant them such honors as a show of respect from one warrior to another. The position of Scanner Master was one of these new ranks within our military, created for a grunt serving aboard a warship within our burgeoning fleets. It is their duty to scan and provide specifications of any nearby ship, be they friend or foe. Within our coalition, the finest of the Unggoy who prove themselves in battle are given the honor of leading our warriors into battle and are given ranks to denote their abilities. One such is Ranger Commander, a title that was held only by a Sangheili during the days of the Covenant. They commanded respect within our Ranger lances, displaying the growth of our military doctrine. The first to achieve this mantle is Stolt, the commander of Urtas Vadum's Ranger contingent aboard his mighty flagship, the Shadow of Intent. An even more profound advancement for the grunts serving within the Swords of Sanghelios is that some now bear the mantle of Shipmaster. Now they serve as the commanders of our vessels within the burgeoning fleets of the Swords of Sanghelios, embodying the very virtues of the Arbiter's Concert of Worlds, an alliance built upon the very foundations of honor and mutual respect. At least one that I know of is in command of a Zanar pattern light cruiser with the name Bad Gas. Next, we have the Unggoy's most bitter rival, the Kig-Yar, or Jackals as you name them. The Kig-Yar interacted with the Covenant only to the extent that it was profitable, but apart from the Sangheili, they represented the most proficient and reliable military element within our old alliance's history. The Kig-Yar were most often seen as snipers and scouts due to their heightened senses and sharp eyes. Interestingly, the Covenant chose to grant the Jackals special dispensations in certain offices and roles, though with great oversight by their superiors. These exceptions revealed a confidence in the species' performance, despite their lack of religious fervor. Filling out all unified infantry ranks, the lowest station a Kig-Yar is given is minor. Much like their despised Unggoy counterparts, the Jackal Minor was commonly seen in combat. It was because of this they were most often seen in every engagement throughout the war. Kig-Yar miners spend most of their time bombarding enemy forces with rapid-fire volleys from their plasma pistol bolts behind their point defense gauntlets. After the war, certain Covenant warlords like that of Merg Vol or Jul Umdama contracted miners into their service in mimicry of the old hegemony. Next after that are majors. Much like their less experienced brethren, majors constitute a large part of the Covenant's mainstream infantry on the field of battle. Though higher in rank than minors, they are still subject to the command of their lance leaders, whether it's Sangheili or Jiralhanae. Majors represent the highest rank within the standard infantry of the Kig-Yar contingent, often assuming leadership positions and specialized roles. At certain times, a Kig-Yar major leads lances of low-ranking Kig-Yar and Unggoy, should their superiors all fall in the combat. But most often, Kig-Yar majors operate better in small groups or scouting parties. However, they can still play a role in precision marksmanship should the need arise. But the most precise of Kig-Yar marksmen are the snipers. Kig-Yar snipers are tasked with the role of revolving around long-range combat, sniper support, scouting, and assassination. The role of a Kig-Yar sniper was viewed as critical to achieve success on most ground-side engagements, and only battle-hardened veteran Kig-Yar are chosen to become part of the sniper class. All Kig-Yar are born gifted with extraordinarily acute senses of sight, hearing, and smell, making them adept as scouts and snipers in the Covenant military. The Kig-Yar's natural ability and skill at stealth makes them efficient hunters, but with their ocular enhanced helmets, their marksmanship increases tenfold. Exceptionally skilled in precision shooting, Kig-Yar snipers would wield beam rifles, focus rifles, or Covenant carbines to great effect, taking out long-range targets that are often hidden from sight. Among the greatest of their number were the Jakar, a specialized order of Kig-Yar snipers that once served the Prophet of Regret during his initial invasion of Earth. They bore no distinguishing markings, boasted no unique armor, accessories, or weaponry beyond that which is standard field issue, and their names were known only to their commander. But those few who have heard the name Jakar have heard the hushed whispers of snipers hitting their mark on shots that most would describe as impossible, as if possessed by a preternatural instinct. The true nature and extent of this order, along with their influence and allegiances amongst active factions, remains unknown. The deadliest of snipers who prove themselves may earn the honor of being given the mantle of Kordat or Arch-Kordat. These are offices of great honor to a jackal, but the true nature of their power and prestige is shrouded by the secretive nature of the Kig-Yar. After the Empire's collapse, many snipers became mercenaries, and many were hired by Covenant warlords to fulfill their own desires, like that of Jiralhane's ilk. The former Kaidan of Beacon Keep contracted many Kig-Yar into his service, most of whom were Ibishan, a subspecies of Kig-Yar hailing from a volcanic region on their homeworld of Ian. The lowest rank of Umdama's Ibishan were the Storm. Much like the Grunts, the Storm Jackals were shock troopers during the days of the original Covenant. Warriors who fought with such ferocity and resolve. But within the Covenant Remnants, the Storm filled the role of the Miner as the lowest standing Kig-Yar rank, until this upstart Covenant fell at Sunayon. The self-proclaimed Hand of the Didact also incorporated Kig-Yar Rangers into his fold. In the days of the original Covenant, Jackal Rangers were trained in space combat like all the other species of that order. Donned with their EVA suits and armed with their shield gauntlets as well as light to medium weaponry, they were also utilized in boarding actions on hostile vessels and external maintenance on allied vessels. At times, they were used to assist elite rangers during combat operations. Jackal Rangers could be deployed into battle through the use of Covenant drop pods, even in zero-G environments. The Kig-Yar Rangers in Jiralhane's reformed Covenant were often used as snipers and scouts on hostile worlds, like that of Requiem or Genesis. But among the swiftest of their number are their Tavawan cousins, Hailing from their asteroid colony of Tavau, this Kig-Yar subspecies are as fast as they are deadly in battle. Many Tavauans served in the War of Annihilation, often being led by Sangheili or Jiralhanae. In the early cycles of the war, mixed units containing both Rutian and Tavauan Kig-Yar were most common. However, this changed as the war went on, with the Covenant doctrine favoring units comprised solely of Tavauan skirmishers. Within the Covenant, the role of skirmisher was held almost exclusively by the Tavauans. But the mantle and practice of the skirmisher extends far beyond the Tavauan legacy, deep into the ancient past of all Kig-Yar. When their species was incorporated into the Covenant, this rank was left intact. Yet they chose to bestow it more upon the Tavauans. Throughout the war, they acted as skilled scouts and hunter-killer groups, cleansing surrounding areas to pave the way for the hammer to strike. Miners among the skirmishers are typically deployed in lances consisting of 5 to 6 members. They can sprint very quickly, evading effectively and jumping several stories to reach high places or evade enemy fire. Unlike most Kig-Yar, which are often deployed in elevated defensive positions, miners are deployed in masses to quickly overtake enemy outposts and overwhelm enemies. Miners operate in a manner that is similar to Kig-Yar pirate kill squads that once raided settlements in the Udao system in the Kig-Yar's early history. Once a miner gains enough experience, they would be promoted to the rank of Major. These are moderately stronger and more durable Tavauans than miners. These majors within the Obedientaries are often deployed due to their speed, with some squads being tracked at running 45 miles per hour in open environments. They would often lead their low-ranking Kig-Yar cousins as well as other Unggoy units upon the battlefield. A major with the highest combat rating would be selected to join the Mermillans. These specialized Tavauans specialize in close-quarters combat. Their armor is based off ancient Kig-Yar gladiatorial designs. These ancient Kig-Yar would hold interclan physical combat competitions in large population centers on Ian's biggest continent. The Mermillans would strike in packs and flank the enemy and use their shield gauntlets to cover their exposed bodies, including their heads, while strafing enemies with their plasma bolts or Sudanese needle shards. But by far the most deadly Tavauan mantle are that of the Commandos. They were selectively picked by Sectoran societies from the asteroids that orbits Chuot. The Kig-Yar on these asteroids were sustained by gray market trade and developed free from Ian's rule. The Commandos were employed by the Kig-Yar's government's militia to fight off piracy that was common on Kig-Yar colonies with extreme ruthlessness and precise fashion. But when the Covenant first arrived, the Commandos joined forces with the pirates in an attempt to fend off the intruders. But the tide was unstoppable, and so they were brought into the hegemon's military when the Jackals signed the Letters of Marque. During the Empire's reign, Commandos formed an elite part of the skirmisher contingents that were deployed by the Covenant. Commandos were specifically trained and designed to form specialized combat files and infantry hunter-killer units. They operated in discrete, close-knit groups with extremely specific mission parameters. Other members of the Covenant military recognized Commandos on the battlefield for their incredibly proficient unit cohesion. But the highest rank attainable for a Kig-Yar skirmisher in the Covenant military was Champion. Clad in their gilded harnesses, they are stronger, faster, and more durable than other skirmishers. In the Covenant, Champions held many roles, as well as being formidable portions of the frontline infantry combatants. Many champions served in leadership positions, reporting directly to Sangheili majors on the battlefield, instead of other lances in the Kig-Yar contingent, due to the need of unilateral communication to outlying infantry forces. Champions would often serve as the intermediary rank between other skirmishers and their Sangheili commanders. Skirmisher champions would often lead Unggoy and other low-ranking Kig-Yar and Yanme'e on the field. Champions had little difficulty keeping lances under their command in line, as they were some of the strongest, best trained, and most heavily armed Kig-Yar at the Covenant's disposal. Kig-Yar society is dominated by their female leaders, who are the apex of their social power structure, governing not only breeding rights, but also rookeries, lineages, and other major assets. And while the power of these queens and matriarchs has eroded over the centuries, much of this way of life remains the same. In the Covenant, these matriarchs often became shipmistresses and were granted extensive control over missionary and exploratory operations, though under strict Sangheili oversight. Male privateers were also contracted as shipmasters, though this was much rarer than females. After the Covenant fell apart, these shipmistresses turned to piracy, raiding and pillaging as their forebears did of old. Some took the style of pirate queens, asserting dominion over large swathes of ships. One such was the pirate queen who ruled over Ven 3 for a time, before your flagship, the Infinity, laid her low, thus ending the reign of this would-be queen. In our present age, some newer stations were crafted for the Kig-Yar as it had been for the other races. Within the Covenant Remnants, the Heavy was one of these. Operating in a supporting role amongst Kig-Yar trackers and scouts, the Kig-Yar Heavies are the most experienced and skilled of their species. They would be deployed in supporting roles for trackers, scouts, as well as participating in boarding operations. The combination of speed, agility, resistance, and firepower makes the Kig-Yar Heavies a force to be reckoned with. Kig-Yar Heavy troopers are equipped with armor that provides excellent protection and wears a helmet contrary to most Kig-Yar infantry troopers. Its design is intended to reflect the Kig-Yar station and intimidate their enemies. The Kig-Yar Heavies wielded an advanced form of the point defense gauntlet cladded in orange energy shielding, which allows them to provide substantial opposition to any foe who encounters them. They are typically seen deployed with needlers. From there, we will now discuss the ranks of the Yanme'e, or the drones as you call them. For a time, the Yanme'e functioned within the Covenant military in only menial service roles, as many Sangheili were wary that, if armed and encountered in large numbers, their species might pose a threat to the Covenant itself. Eventually though, the Yanme'e were incorporated into the military, even taking positions of command among their own forces. The Sangheili aggressively limited Yanme'e detachment numbers to avoid any signs of mutiny, deploying them in small groups as fast attack infantry and scouts, as well as for tactical deception and ambushes, since they were capable of limited flights in many contexts. The earliest stages of a Yanme'e's life cycle are the pupas. This infant stage of Yanme'e are only found inside their hives, in which they are grown. Their bodies emit a yellow glow, which is not present in later stages of a Yanme'e's life cycle. Even when dead, their bodies and carapaces continue to emit the glow. They are extremely weak and vulnerable to gunfire, more so than most Yanme'e, and only equipped with plasma pistols. Occasionally, male Yanme'e are born with an aversion to their hives. These individuals are referred to as unmutuals. The term is an inexact translation of the Yanme'e speech, however. The term is also referred to as incapable of socialization. These are male Yanme'e who suffer from a rare personality disorder, rendering the affected creature incapable of functioning as a single coherent hive mind. This deficiency causes significant problems within their rigid, socialized species, ultimately leading to psychopathic behavior. These unmutuals brutally attack their own kin, sometimes with little provocation, and even destroy eggs. These individuals are considered outcast, banished from their hives, and often find refuge in small cavernous spaces between hive territories. Following their species' integration into the Covenant, the number of unmutuals began to rise significantly, and as such, the Covenant sentenced unmutuals to work as slaves in penal colonies run by Kig-Yar, where they are worked to death and even tortured. Despite their violent and unpredictable nature, some unmutuals exhibit remarkable cleverness and intelligence. Whether they continue to exist now, beyond the periphery of Palamak, is unclear. But if by happenstance you encounter them, run. For the Yanme'e who served in the Covenant, minor is considered the lowest of any caste. Originally, Yanme'e were deployed by the Covenant as engineers and technicians. However, most of this role was eventually replaced by the Huragok, and the Yanme'e began being deployed in combat roles. They are commanded by majors and ultras. Age seems to be a factor in determining the rank of a Yanme'e. Minors tend to not have any of the protrusions, unlike that of their older brethren. These drones are distinguished by their light green exoskeletons, and like all Yanme'e, are equipped with an anti-gravity technology that is attached to their wings that allows them to fly freely. Minors carry light weaponry, from plasma pistols, needlers, and at times, even plasma rifles. As was common within the Covenant ranking system, Yanme'e minors were outranked by their majors. Marked by their blue exoskeletons, they exhibit metaphorical differences from their minor and pupil cousins, with the presence of 3 small protrusions coming from their head. Though not all. They may also have longer wings and fly faster than their lower-ranked brethren. Yanme'e captains are one of the highest caste in the Yanme'e infantry. They are denoted by their red-colored carapaces and energy shielding. Strange as that might seem, no other Yanme'e carries such technology. Captains command over their lesser cousins in battle, or when guarding their developing hives. Another high rank within the Yanme'e are the Ultras. Though little is known about their actual role and capacity, what is known is their appearance. Yanme'e Ultras are distinguished by their blue and cyan exoskeletons, along with a pair of 4 horn-like structures from their heads and carapaces. Lightly armed, these distinguished drones command over their lesser hivekin, such as minors and majors. But the most important thing to remember, humans, is that the Yanme'e society is divided into 3 social castes: domestic, workers, and protectors. The protector caste serves as the Yanme'e equivalent to a military force, where the highest rank, hitherto observed among them, is the Hive Ward. When deployed to alien planets, Yanme'e quickly set up establishing hives, typically in subterranean areas which are difficult for hostile elements to reach. In the event that a hive is breached, however, a coordinated defense is required to ensure these strongholds retain their entrenched positions. These efforts were typically led by a hive ward, who are distinguished by their golden carapaces and possess the authority to command all ranks below them. Because of their specific role, hive wards are almost never seen outside of the hive itself. Within the Covenant, hive wards were granted more privileged weaponry, as well as more powerful energy shielding. These advantages make them formidable warriors of their abodes. But perhaps the highest station in the Yanme'e society are that of their hive queens. A queen controls her hive through the use of sonic and pheromonal signals. Yanme'e society is organized around their queens. They lead an aggressively matriarchal society, with all other caste supporting the hive's preservation through the orders of a queen. Yanme'e queens are responsible for the species' reproduction and their way of life, leading to the well-being of a queen being the utmost importance to the hive. This aspect was often exploited by the Covenant on worlds they sought to overrun, allowing Yanme'e to establish hives as autonomous footholds which prevented enemies from being able to mount a counteroffensive. Queens were so honored that they would be invited to high charity to attend the ascending ceremony of a hierarch as they usher in a new age for the Covenant. Palamak, their home world, is governed by a collection of these queens, and it is said that they are keenly intelligent, which makes them all the more dangerous. If I were you, I would leave them to their isolation, as they have been since the fall of the Covenant. Next we have the more enigmatic member of the Covenant, the Huragok. Beings that defy the contrast between machine and biological organism. They cannot be called a species, not having evolved but artificially created by the Forerunners themselves, who built them up with nanocellular intricacies to be repaired and enhanced mechanisms, to act as maintenance engineers towards devices we had once called sacred relics. For that reason, they are more commonly known as engineers. Since they were discovered by the Sanshum reformists, they have served the Covenant and its military as caretakers of valued artifacts and maintaining medical equipment on the field. Due to their extraordinary value, some factions within the Covenant rigged bombs to Huragok when they were deployed on a world, mainly to prevent them from being captured by the enemy. After the war, many Huragok have vanished. Some believe they were taken by the Sanshum when they fled to the unknown regions of the galaxy, though our spies have reported that many have been enslaved by the Banished. But there is hope, for more have found sanctuary with us, the Swords of Sangheili. The Huragok had no formal place within our military, but they were still of use, for they generated artificial shielding on even our most weakest of soldiers, making them even more formidable and valued. I have even heard some tales that the Forerunners had blessed a few Huragok with the gift of healing flesh as they would for machines or other such holy artifacts. But I had thought them tall ones. That is until one was discovered not that long ago on a rebel world your kind has called Gao. Whether more exist in our galaxy or not, I cannot say. Let us now turn our attention to the fiercest, most formidable, and very strange race that had once served in the Covenant military, the Lekgolo. They are a species of worm-like creatures discovered in dense colonies within the rings of Tay. each governed by an expansive Gestalt intelligence. These colonies are capable of taking on many forms, binding together individual Lekgolo into more intelligent and specialized arrangements. Since the taming of the Lekgolo, the Sanshum have cultivated and pruned several families of Gestalts to demonstrate useful behavior and forms, often choosing to augment some colonies with tools that provide protection, environmental support, sensory inputs, and nutrient feeds. The ones your people are most familiar with are the Lekgolo, hulking, compound bodies clad in heavy armor plating, embodying enormous and powerful Covenant soldiers. Lekgolo were almost always deployed in pairs as armored spearheads, using their exceptional size and power to overwhelm enemy defenses and obliterate all who stood before them. Commonly referred to as Bond Brothers, these pairs lacked any formal rank within the Covenant, but represented the clenched fist of any field commander wise enough to utilize them. Their most common deployment was to fortify critical sites and defensive positions. The Lekgolo's unique qualities often placed them at odds with the other client species, most choosing to simply steer clear of these lumbering giants. When equipped with a devastating assault cannon and an ultra-dense Pavis shield, the Lekgolo are virtually without equal amongst the Covenant's infantry units. At the height of combat, these extraordinary hunters generally view all other species, including that of their own allies, as impeding irritations, an aspect that frequently results in collateral damage. However, some Lekgolo lineages were piled into exotic service in other fields of war within the Covenant, and others for more scientific endeavors. The Rulo Lekgolo were artificially created by the Covenant as the control mass for the Scarab tanks and other mobile excavators, used to stunning effect in groundside combat and occupations. Before that, they were simply used to excavate Forerunner artifacts on outlying worlds. Another subspecies of Lekgolo Gestalts were the Saba Lekgolo. They were utilized to operate the large Za-Sahara pattern heavy excavator, or the Harvester as it was sometimes called. They were a large gathering of another Lekgolo lineage known as Difo Lekgolo. After the taming of the Lekgolo, the prophets learned that these strange creatures could access many pathways into the holiest of Forerunner artifacts, even the Dreadnought itself, the beating heart of the Covenant. And in so doing, the Difo Lekgolo became the exploration colony cultivated by the Sanshum to map out the Dreadnought's interior. Another Gestalt family was recorded in the old logs, the Canto Lekgolo. Alas, what records kept of them were lost in the fall of High Charity. What is known is that the Lekgolo had no formal leadership that is known to other sentient creatures like you or I. But they do keep a sort of title for their elders: Swarm Lords. Swarm Lords consist of two individual members of a given Lekgolo bond brother pairing, each demonstrating a number of behavioral characteristics different to the standard Lekgolo. Rather than simply acting as a hive mind following orders, Swarm Lords tend towards more individualized forms of identity and intelligence. As such, Swarm Lords tend to find themselves leading forces of other Lekgolo in the field. The only Lekgolo pair who bore such a title have joined the warring splinter groups of the Fallen Covenant, such as the renegade Evocati forces led by Ki-Nazaz, or that of the Banished. And now we reach the race who rose so high in the Covenant, only to burn, plummeting into the abyss. The Jiralhanae, a vicious, violent lot you humans appropriately call Brutes. They were the last species brought into the Covenant following their disastrous civil war, the Great Immolation. When the Covenant came to their world, they quickly adopted the faith into their own and quickly became the second most powerful race in the military, just under the elites. During much of their tenure within the Covenant, the Jiralhanae operated as independent shock troopers due to their tendency towards excessive violence and disregard to orders that did not originate from their own chieftains. Although they eventually gained some notoriety in other roles within the Covenant's unified rank structure, the most dominant switch happened when the Prophet of Truth suddenly granted them full military authority, invoking them against their Sangheili masters. Calling the warsmiths of Doisak to refit their time-honored weapons with new technology, the Jiralhanae managed to wrest control over the entire Covenant military. While ruling chieftains and their bodyguards existed prior to this treachery, it was here that they saw their greatest influence. Other roles became more prominent since their coup. Before that, the Brutes were seen leading lower castes into battle under the watchful eye of the Sangheili. Your kind have encountered many Brutes, some clad in armor, others more lightly armored, covered in their thick fur. This was largely due to their tribal taboos. In their society, there were two different skeins, collections of Jiralhanae packs who shared different ideologies. The Wutals and the Vilots. The former are traditionalists who favor brute strength above all, while the latter embraces technological innovations. It was for these reasons that certain appearances vary with some ranks among the Covenant, for those hailed from Wutals or Vilots. The lowest rank for a Jiralhanae in the Covenant military, like many others, are the miners. These were the least experienced Jiralhanae serving in the Covenant military, and as such, they rate the weakest armor and shields and typically possess the least endurance. After the Great Schism, the miners made up the largest contingency of heavy ground forces for the Covenant. The strength of a Jiralhanae miner usually comes from their sheer numbers. Newly recruited miners often compete for their armor, gear, and posting. Most were armed with medium to heavy weapons such as carbines, spikers, and concussion rifles. Above them are the majors. Majors are experienced soldiers of the Covenant, making up a portion of the Jiralhanae ranking system. Majors often led files and lances of low-ranking Jiralhanae and Unggoy on the battlefield. Compared to minors, the majors exhibit better combat skills and tactical maneuvers. As such, they are given better armor protection and have access to better armaments. Majors are often sported with their brute shots, grenade launchers that cripple both soldiers and vehicles. The highest of the basic Jiralhanae infantry ranks of the Old Covenant are the Ultras. They were few in number compared to that of minors and majors. Because of their intermediate status in the Jiralhanae hierarchy, these Jiralhanae usually can be found leading at least 2 or 3 Jiralhanae minors and at times, majors, and small groups of lesser Unggoy and Kig-Yar. They are also frequently led by a captain or a chieftain. When the schism erupted, specialist roles were introduced in large numbers, but they were still present, albeit in less abundance throughout the War of Annihilation. The Stalkers were the first of these. Stalkers were commonly seen acting as spies and bodyguards to their chieftains. However, they had a far more covert role within the Covenant. On the battlefield, they can function as spies and assassins. Jiralhanae stalkers often use their active camouflage to flank and ambush unsuspecting hostile forces. In this way, they are often seen as the brute equivalent to the stealth and special operations Sangheili, albeit more savage and more brutal. They also use radar jammers to confuse their enemies before charging in with their maulers to finish them off. In the early cycles of the war, the deadliest of their number were selected by warriors of the Silent Shadow to join the ranks of the Blood Stars. They gained a particular notoriety within the Spec Ops circles by being primarily led by Jiralhanae. The Blood Stars came into prominence as the Covenant's war against your kind raged on, and their primary objective was made quite clear: hunt down and eliminate the Spartan demons by whatever means necessary. Employing a wide range of specialists, including members of the Silent Shadow itself, the Blood Stars were focused primarily on hunting down these demons, often in defense of key strategic locations and assets. Less well known, but no less deadly, are the Jump Pack Brutes. Jumpers, as you call them, bore specialized Jiralhanae power armor, fitted with jump packs for increased mobility. In many ways, they served as the Jiralhanae equivalent to Sangheili Rangers, but unlike the Rangers, Jumpers are not capable of complete aerial tactical maneuvering. Instead, their jump packs propel them to one jump at a time across a great distance. To the Jiralhanae, they believe that there are few higher honors than serving in the jump pack unit. There are two main subclasses within this rank: Jumper Majors and Jumper Ultras, though what records kept of them was lost in the fall of High Charity. Given the violent and tumultuous nature of the brutes, their leadership relies on protection from any potential rivals seeking to claim their mantle. The bodyguards are the most common. They're responsible for the protection of the chieftains within their packs and other Covenant political figures, as well as for the enforcement of tribal and military law. Whenever a chieftain is nearby, bodyguards will not be far behind. These warriors wear power armor that bears a remarkable resemblance to that of their captains, though bodyguards are colored in pale silver blue with a red color undersuit. They tend to favor Covenant weapons, such as plasma rifles and carbines, rather than their own native technology, but they have been seen wielding powerful brute shots and maulers. Bodyguards are also equipped with a bubble shield for additional protection and regenerators to heal themselves in combat on the battlefield. They also utilize power drains to interfere with electronic equipment and energy shields that belong to their enemies. But the highest station a bodyguard could bear were the honor guards. Following the assassination of the High Prophet of Regret, the remaining hierarchs dismissed their Sangheili guardians in favor of their savage puppets. Clad in the ceremonial garbs of the honor guard, they guarded the High Prophets with a fierce zeal and ferocious desire for blood. What remained of them had fled with the High Prophet of Truth to the Ark, while the rest fell prey to the parasite. Within Jiralhanae culture, the mantle of Captain is divided into three: Captain, Captain Major, and Captain Ultra. The standard captain are seasoned Jiralhanae warriors and are more heavily armed and armored than standard Jiralhanae infantry. They are smarter and significantly tougher than their lesser brethren. For this reason, they are but the first steps of power for their barbaric race. As with most Jiralhanae armors prior to the Great Schism, captains wore standard partial body armor, although based on differing skins. Wutal captains were identified by their small holographic red flags attached to their harnesses extending from their backs. while Violet captains wore rather a gold helmet and a more resilient armor than their Rutal counterparts. After the schism broke out, the Jiralhanae were given elevated status in the Covenant military, and in so doing, they were issued with iridescent power armor equipped with advanced energy shielding. Captain Majors are the second highest Jiralhanae ranks within their captains. However, they are deployed more often than the other captain ranks. Captain Majors often led lower-ranking Jiralhanae, as well as lances of other lesser Covenant species. A Jiralhanae captain is promoted to the rank of Captain Major for his ability to rally and inspire the other forces within the Covenant. Although, this inspiration usually draws from more fear than respect. Their armor, clad in bright gold, is much more resilient than that of the standard captains. Jiralhanae Captain Majors can be seen commanding troops aboard Scarab tanks. Their shields are much more resilient and stronger than the rest. The greatest of the captains are the Captain Ultras. This was the highest station a captain could achieve within the rank and file of the Jiralhanae. They are stronger and more experienced than other Jiralhanae infantry or even that of the captains. Jiralhanae Captain Ultras are trained to be immensely strong and agile. On the battlefield, Captain Ultras can be seen commanding Jiralhanae packs and files or lances that are made up of low-ranking species within the Covenant. Captain Ultras wear Cyan Leader power armor, which signifies their rank than the Gold Captain Majors. The armor offers a high resistance to most weapons to protect its users. Captain Ultras are armed with a wide assortment of weapons, though they tend to favor their own archaic brute shots. Let us now discuss their leadership, their chieftains. In the Covenant, chieftains primarily served as military commanders, like those of field masters. They are the leaders of a group of half a dozen or more Jiralhanae, as well as other low-caste species within a pack. In Jiralhanae society, chieftains wielded gravity hammers evolved from traditional war hammers as a symbol of their clan's leadership, in addition to being powerful weapons, which are the major focus of the Jiralhanae barbaric culture. A ceremonial hammer of a pact or clan is passed only to another Jiralhanae if he can best his chieftain in single combat. The mantle of leadership passes along with the weapon, with long and storied histories stretching back to the days of the Great Immolation. Apart from a pack leadership position, they likewise serve as spiritual leaders, giving sermons to their pack brothers. The armor of a chieftain can vary. Those of the Violet are clad in resilient, ornate crimson and black armor, paying homage to the dangerous Degaroth beasts of Doisak. Rutals, however, bear minimal armor in accordance with their ideologies. The mightiest of their numbers are the War Chieftains, a title whose origins can be traced back to the days of early Jiralhanae history. War Chieftains are superior to that of regular chieftains and are responsible for commanding much larger packs in battle. Despite this, War Chieftains were most often seen guarding smaller outposts, and they were commonly seen as commanders of scarabs and would always be seen commanding their own war brothers, unburdened by the dead weight of the other species carried during the war. Their numbers were vastly diminished by the fallout of the Great Schism, for many traveled to the Ark with the Prophet of Truth. Chieftains and War Chieftains were both ordained by the prophets to serve in the Covenant Navy. As shipmasters, they would dominate their warships with as much a force as they would on the battlefield. Yet, under the scrupulous eyes of the Sangheili, their ships were greatly limited in battle and invasions. Yet when the prophets bestowed more favor upon them, their ships grew even more powerful, and by the time of the schism, some were even given the mantle of Fleetmaster, commanding entire flotillas as they supplanted the Sangheili from power. But perhaps the most powerful mantle a Jiralhanae warrior can only dream to attain was Chieftain of the Jiralhanae. This title was fashioned by the High Prophets to serve as the supreme head of the Jiralhanae species within the Covenant. Where a chieftain controls a relatively small pack or clan, the chieftain of the Jiralhanae had full authority over the Jiralhanae species, governing their savage race with an iron hand, at the whim and pleasure of the Sanshum. The only brute who bore such a title was Tartarus. Armed with the legendary Fist of Rukt, this Rutal chieftain came to serve as the right hand of the Prophet of Truth when the Great Schism erupted. When he died at the hands of the Arbiter, many coveted the mantle, but none were ever deemed worthy enough to claim it for their own before the Covenant fell for good and all. Afterwards, many warring tribes and factions broke out, each seeking to claim wealth or glory, many of whom retained the old ranks of the Covenant to suit their own ambitions. Even a few Sangheili warlords managed to sway the loyalties of certain packs to their cause, though most fought alone. But one group, the Keepers of the One Freedom, fashioned new ranks into their cult before it was decimated. One such was the Captain Deacon. We know very little about their true purpose, but I can only assume it was made for their aspiring young bloods, for many bore shorter tusk, a sign of youth for Jiralhanae if memory serves. But the wisest of the Keepers were given the mantle of Dokab. This title was used to denote their religious elders. The Keepers were guided by a council of these Dokab chieftains before they were all slain in the decimation of the Keepers in the cycles after the war. And so at last, we reached the heads of the original Covenant military, the Iron Hand of the Prophets, the Sangheili. As the preeminent warriors of the Covenant, the Sangheili were responsible for a wide variety of combat roles on the battlefield, from heavy infantry to pilots. The advancement of rank and responsibilities was a function of individual merit and the accrual of honor, generally measured by the number of kills secured. Minor is the first rank a Sangheili warrior attains when entering Covenant service. Although the lowest and most common of the Sangheili ranks, the Sangheili Minor's threat is not to be underestimated. These are experienced soldiers and can easily overpower any human who faces him in battle. Though their harnesses can vary across most fields, they are marked by the blue color of their armor. Sangheili miners held limited command over lesser castes, wielding their plasma rifles, as was common in those times. Those who do not earn enough kills for advancement in the ranks, nor die in their first planetary campaign, are expected to commit suicide so that their honor remains intact. Those that do earn glory in battle are given the rank of Major. Clad in their red harnesses, Majors are but the first steps in the obedientary ranks, the Covenant's officer rate, increasing one's area of influence. Sangheili Majors represent the highest echelon within the Covenant's infantry and are known primarily for their ruthlessness. Majors are some of the most skilled and experienced warriors in the field, and typically command lances of fewer than a dozen soldiers, including that of their lowly Sangheili miners. They are also commonly used as pilots in both ground and aerial vehicles, with the Sangheili pilots of crafts such as Seraphs explicitly drawn from the ranks of the Obedientaries. Though majors are part of the standard infantry, it is not uncommon for them to be used in the presence of a shipmaster or fleetmaster, due to the critical nature of their roles in the front lines. Majors have been known to serve them as either their stewards or the second-in-command of their vessels, serving them with undying adherence unless they prove unable to perform in their duties, in which case they can be removed by their second, forcibly if necessary. The officer is a further advancement within the ranks of the obedientaries. Sangheili officers bore little difference to that of the majors, save for their more distinct and ornate harnesses. After them are the Evocati, or Ultras as the human forces knew them. Their alabaster combat harnesses mark them as combat specialists, able of executing missions for which failure is not an option, and defeat unthinkable. They are veteran warriors who have demonstrated the highest standards of military proficiency, teamwork, honor, and devotion to the Covenant. The Evocati are a brotherhood of warriors born, devoted to their skill at arms, and little else. Instead, they find the apex of their warrior career in this brotherhood, crowned with glory and guaranteed a position of honor and respect in their family archives and the record vaults of high charity. Few remain at this pinnacle for long, and the Sangheili promoted to Ultra are expected to take up honorable posts as seneschals, tread the path of political warfare as a counselor, or return to their ministry to train the next generation of warriors. Ultras rarely answer to the war host commander to which they are attached, though some degree of cooperation and synchronization is necessary to achieve their mutual goals. Ultras elect delegates from among their ranks to take on this responsibility before each deployment and swearing a binding oath to obey their commands until all objectives are complete. These Evocati Delegatus held no official leadership position within the Covenant hierarchy and were not counted among the obedientaries, but they are acknowledged as the subject matter experts in the art of war and wield real authority on the battlefield. In your human terms, they are equivalent to that of your warrant officers, selected for talent and knowledge which complements the tactical objectives at hand. Within the Evocati, they have a collection of seneschal warriors serving within their ranks. Little is known of the Evocati's seneschal order, but what documents that have been recovered in the wake of High Charity's destruction that these warriors bore their own harnesses. Harnesses very different from that of other Ultras. Beyond that, I shall endeavor to shift what grain can be found from the chaff. The highest station a Sangheili can attain in the Covenant infantry was that of the Sangheili General. In their golden ornate harnesses, generals within the Covenant military were tasked with commanding legions or war host, a charge of oversight of hundreds or even thousands of warriors. They served as field commanders during long-term ground campaigns, overseeing long-term military occupations, groundside engagements, and long-term strategic goals. During some campaigns, multiple generals were required. Each is expected to work in concert with the others to cover all theaters of war. While working predominantly in a commanding role, generals are experienced combatants in their own right, and only achieve their rank after many years of service in the front lines of battle. Sangheili generals have been known to carry a heavy assortment of weaponry, chief amongst them concussion rifles, fuel rod cannons, and at times, fire blades. Let us now turn towards the specialized ranks that existed during the Covenant's rule. We shall begin with the Storm. As with all the others, your species has encountered this race within the Covenant Remnants, but its origins reach back to the days of the Old Covenant. They were shock troopers, fighting with extreme ferocity and zeal. Like others, the Storm had their own ranking system, most of which remains obscure. What we do know is that their commanders bore gold coloring to the Teshakan pattern harnesses the Storm units worn. Following the Great Schism, many Storm-class Sangheili joined Dama's Covenant, while others flocked to the swords of Sanghelios, or simply became mercenaries. These post-war stormtroops served in basic infantry, mirroring the miners of old. Another Sangheili specialized role in the Covenant were the artifact retrieval teams of the Ministry of Tranquility. They would secure the most rare and holiest relics from dangerous worlds far from the periphery of the Covenant Empire. The leaders of such units are unknown, but one title, Third Commander, was held by the heretic leader Sessa Rufume, who led lances to the gas giant threshold, and later rebelled against the High Council. Those who followed him became known as heretics. Only two rates existed in his rebellion, minors and majors. They served in the same role as the basic infantry leaders before they were destroyed by the Arbiter near the end of the war. Within the old Covenant military were an array of special warfare elements, each dedicated to furthering the Empire's goals through unconventional and highly effective means. The Covenant Special Warfare Group was home to a number of these distinctive divisions, such as Special Operations, Fleet Security, Mediate Tactics, as well as a variety of specialized individual roles, such as Rangers, Commandos, Raiders, and Stalkers. Over the centuries, this entity grew in overall purview and influence, particularly during the 3-decade-long war with humanity, a conflict that forced the Covenant to evolve strategies in ways it had never known before. Your kind's resolve and unflinching countermeasures required a diverse array of unique approaches that had only previously existed in theory. This was in addition to the fact that many of your worlds contained countless Forerunner artifacts, treasures your kind were more than willing to desecrate in order to deny the Covenant's access. Within Fleet Security are the Rangers, normally deployed as an expeditionary force during limited naval engagements. It is they who choose which craft to be boarded and which destroyed. Experts in both zero-G combat and demolitions, they have proven to be the bane of many a ship. Rangers also perform assault units and traditional scouting roles. As part of the Covenant's fleet security, the Rangers were tasked with the security of each Covenant fleet they were attached to. This placed the Rangers in a defensive role, such as removing foreign forces from entering or commandeering a ship. The Rangers can also perform offensive roles, such as space insertions and demolition tasks. Those attached to a fleet are led by their First Blade Fleet Rangers. These warriors were clad in the blue armor of their order. Ranger Commanders, the most senior of their officers, command all units during planetary campaigns and likewise bore a similar harness, albeit in gold. Though their harnesses can vary from time to time, the Rangers wear sealed combat armor that would always allow them to work in the vacuum of space or other treacherous environments. As well, they have been known to carry thruster packs, granting them better mobility. These warriors are traditionally armed with long-range weaponry, such as carbines, focus rifles, and needle rifles, but can carry dual plasma rifles when in combat. They remain in use to this day, both within the ranks of the Covenant Remnants and the Swords of Sanghelios after the Covenant Empire fell apart in the Great Schism. The Special Warfare Group's primary division is the Special Operations, dedicated to unconventional warfare initiatives. with the central goal to hinder the enemy's response as quickly and discreetly as possible. Warriors within the Special Operations typically work alongside conventional warfare groups to infiltrate enemy fortifications and provide advanced reconnaissance. It is not uncommon, however, for these units to work in complete isolation for a significant period of time in order to execute classified mission objectives. Spec Ops strike teams, led by their commanders and sub-commanders, are routinely utilized to hunt down high-value targets, penetrate enemy lines, and provide advanced scouting intel for larger military operations. The deadliest of their number might even be invited to join the ranks of the Silent Shadow. The Silent Shadow are a unique division exclusive to the Sangheili, renowned for their ruthlessness and unyielding approach to perfecting their craft, the elimination of high-value targets. Within the Order itself are several individual squads, always made up primarily of a Sangheili swordsman and adept assassin. Boasting unique deep crimson battle harnesses and blood-red energy swords, the Silent Shadow struck fear within the hearts of not only their enemies, but all who served alongside them. Selected Silent Shadow were even chosen to lead the Bloodstars, an order once dedicated to the hunting and slaying of the Spartan demons. Little is known of their order's true origins, but their future is even more enigmatic. After the Great Schism, many members of their order began to question where their loyalty should lie, and it is uncertain what the answer will be. In the days of the Old Covenant, these warriors were led by their First Blade officers. Marked by their crimson visors, they would lead units of Silent Shadow hunting parties on any mission their Sanshum superiors saw fit. Another unit within the Special Warfare Group were the Commandos. Little is known of their role within the Covenant, however, but they were always clad in their Lekgolo pattern intrusion harness. A more well-known unit were that of the Stealth Sangheili, not to be confused with the Special Operations Sangheili. These soldiers were assassins and spies of the Covenant Fleet Security. Unlike their Special Operations counterparts, Sangheili serving under the Stealth class are distributed throughout the Covenant's ground forces in standard battlefield units. Stealth Sangheili participate in most widespread ground engagements. Though part of the Special Warfare Group, Stealth Sangheili report directly to Fleet Security as their role concentrates more on the acquisition of intelligence and strategic countermeasures than direct combat. Their commanders are usually high-ranking fleet leaders and can even be Sanshum prophets, depending on the nature of their service. Those employed by a prophet would be named Osuna, or Eye of the Prophets in the Sangheili tongue. An Osuna was a title assigned to a Sangheili ordered with recovering hostile intelligence from the battlefield, or sent on high-risk missions of critical importance, such as assassination. Those who once held this title are now considered enemies of their keeps for treacherous actions during the Great Schism. Beyond the Special Warfare Group were other ranks and stations in the Old Covenant military. Yet by far the most sacred and deadliest were the Zealots. Zealots are greatly experienced and unparalleled in combat skill. Equipped with advanced armor systems and equipment, this title is almost exclusively held by the Sangheili. Yet unlike the majority of the Covenant's conventional military forces, which fell under the authority of the Ministry of Resolution, the Zealots were a separate group that reported directly to the Ministry of Fervent Intercession. Within the ministry existed a number of chapters, such as the Devoted Sentries, many of which adhered to the practical interpretations of ancient codes of honor or debt pacts. Some of these chapters trace their lineages back to the days before the rise of the Covenant. The Zealot's internal structure, ranking, and equipment vary from chapter to chapter and from fleet to fleet. The Ministry would deploy small teams of Zealots during all engagements to locate, analyze, and amass knowledge regarding reliquary sites, as well as to recover holy artifacts or otherwise important data. For over a millennium, the most noble and skilled Sangheili warriors compete fiercely for the privilege to being selected to serve as the Honor Guard. These handpicked few swore fealty to the High Council and took binding vows to protect them unto death. They were without equal in the Covenant, warriors of unfaltering faith and extraordinary talent, evoking fear in all who served in their presence. But because one was expected to encounter little to no combat in the posting, many who were selected to join the Order declined the offer. Each guardsman were clad in ornate, glowing harnesses and armed with energy staves and energy swords for ceremonial purposes. The Lights of Sanghelios was a revered elite unit among the Sangheili Honor Guard, whose determination and skills are second to none. Clad in white, the Helios Guard executes the will of the prophets as if it was their own. The Honor Guards of old were led by their commander, Blade Masters who bore gilded harnesses. It was they who were personally responsible for leading their brothers in the protection of the hierarchs at all cost. This institution endured for over 3,000 cycles, but all this changed many cycles ago. As part of his plan to eventually overthrow the Sangheili, the Prophet of Truth slowly withered down their numbers until, with the death of the High Prophet of Regret, he fully changed out the Honor Guards with his own personal selection of the savage but fanatically loyal Jiralhanae. An unheard move that stained the entire High Council with dishonor. This act alone nearly tore the Covenant apart and set the stage for the Great Schism that soon followed. Many other lesser honors and stations were given to the Sangheili all throughout the long history of the Covenant. Weapons Masters were those given charge of armories, maintaining and distributing weapons and other equipment amongst the ship or unit. In these roles, Weapons Masters essentially served as quartermasters to wherever they are posted. Artillery Masters were those who handled and maintained ordnance for artillery emplacements. Many found service with warlords when the Blooding Years began, with many besieging Vadam Keep during the siege at Kolar. Tank Masters were experts in operating wraiths within the mechanized infantry of the Covenant war machine. To this day, many found service to Umdama's rabble, or worse, the Banished. Sky Masters were the lords of the air. Their expertise in aerial warfare were without equal, and they were expected to train the newer generation of pilots so that their legacy would endure. And lastly, the Master Shipwrights were experts in designing and overseeing the creation of Covenant warships, old and new, so that the superiority of the Covenant's fleets remained intact. Of all other species in the Covenant, the Sangheili wielded immeasurable power in the military arms of the old hegemony, with many great leaders being bestowed ranks and titles denoting both their prestige and their unwavering devotion to the great journey. First of these are the Field Masters. These are field commanders placed in command of war hosts or other such temporary groupings. Many of their number came from the chapters of the Zealot Order, and as such, many bore the ceremonial armor of the Zealots, though many more wore more simple harnesses, but all were clad in golden attires. Fieldmasters were heavily armed with either fuel rod cannons or their fearsome plasma blades. Above them are the field marshals. Your kind have only scarcely encountered these fierce warriors during the war, often leading zealot demi-lances, but in truth, they were direct agents of a fleet supreme commander, and it is they who oversaw multiple legions during planetary invasions. Despite their importance on the battlefield, they are frequently present on the front lines in areas of importance and directing operations from there, rather than some fortified positions or spacecraft. After them are the Shipmasters. As with so many other titles used by the Covenant, Shipmaster is a naval role aboard a vessel and not a formal rank, not unlike that of a human captain. While the title of Shipmaster can be attained by individuals of different species and rank, it is most prominently held by Sangheili of great tactical skill. The Shipmaster of a particular ship gives orders from the command center of their vessels, or a bridge as your kind calls it. Some Sangheili shipmasters have been known to wear Dormir fur cloaks as a sign of their status and rank. They persevere to this day, commanding their ships in the name of one warlord after another. But in the Old Covenant, shipmasters were answerable to the fleetmasters of their flotillas. One of the varying degrees of command titles within the Covenant fleet, the title of Fleetmaster was given to an officer in command of a fleet or task force. It was their charge to assign command of individual ships to shipmasters of proven ability as they in turn lead them within a Covenant fleet. That title was originally reserved only for Sangheili officers within the Covenant fleet, until the prophets cast us out. And following the Empire's collapse in the Great Schism, some of our kin still cling to this title, under the sway of the many Covenant splinter states. Wearing golden harnesses to signify their command position, Fleetmasters normally utilize a large warship as their flagship, such as the mighty assault carrier or the Varric pattern heavy cruiser. At present, some Fleetmasters have found that the ancient Karak merchant cruisers are surprisingly capable and resilient troop and material transport in the modern conflicts of the Blooding Years. But in the Covenant, those Fleetmasters so ordained by the will of the hierarchs themselves are given the mantle of Supreme Commander. The word of a Supreme Commander was absolute within his forces, and only the sponsoring ministry, the High Council, or even the High Prophets themselves could countermand these orders. The Supreme Commander was head of the Armada, backed by Fleetmasters as well as their own Shipmasters. These groupings were formed into a task force, a group of warships and support vessels that were used at their own discretion. Yet even Supreme Commanders pale in comparison to that of an Imperial Admiral, the highest possible rank within the entire Covenant military. The last who bore such a title was the legendary Zaitan Jar Watinri, who was so feared and respected that even the hierarchs forced him into exile. It was he who rallied our best leaders in preparation for a counterattack against the vile brutes when the Great Schism broke out, only to perish when a human Nova bomb decimated his flagship, his fleet, and most of the fortress world of Saipan Kal. But our people were more than just soldiers. In the days of the original Covenant, the wisest of our leaders came to serve in the political arenas on high charity. The Oracle Masters were the first of these. Such a title was that of a public office, serving as counsel to some of our most prominent leadership, be it an Imperial Admiral or that of a hierarch. But for an elite who desires a political path, none was ever so higher than that of High Counselor. It was they who sat on the Covenant High Council along with their Sanshum counterparts in accordance to the terms laid down by the Writ of Union that was signed over 3,000 cycles ago. Hundreds convened within the Covenant High Council chamber, laying down laws and edicts throughout the entire hegemony. They would also present themselves at the Ascension ceremony when a new hierarch is chosen, with one task with asking a prophet their new names. Sangheili counselors wore a basic harness clad in silver and gold, but also wore an ornate headdress to denote their high station. Many high counselors were slaughtered when the Great Schism began. Those who survived are as divided as the Sangheili themselves. Some followed the Arbiter, some align with the Covenant Remnants. The rest cling to their own ambitions. In the aftermath of the Covenant's fall, many warlords crafted new ranks, offices, and honors to their Sangheili warriors to set them apart from their rivals and enemies. Jiralhane's Covenant chief amongst them. The Commander is one of them. Many Sangheili who had served as officers under the Old Covenant's reign became commanders of their own factions following the Great Schism. They filled in the role left behind by the Obedientaries, and most eventually chose to follow rising leaders such as Jiralhanae and Salih Neon, though some formed pocket empires and independent alliances. They bore new, ornate harnesses that mimics that of the officers of the old empire, and most chose to carry medium to heavy weaponry, such as storm rifles or concussion rifles. The highest station within Unggoy's forces were that of the warrior class. They were entirely made up of seasoned war veterans that survived the War of Annihilation. Most did not operate in leadership positions, but instead claimed many lives. They were few in number, but when seen, they were masters of the field. Known for their powerful energy shields and devastating weaponry, warriors were considered some of the most fearsome members of Unggoy's faction. They were aggressive and durable fighters and devastating when fighting in groups. After Unggoy fell, many such warriors and generals banded together to make their final stand at Sunayan. All were slain in the battle that followed. Within the Covenant Remnants of Jiralhanae, the mantle of leadership was that of the Hand of the Didact. This title was fashioned when the fallen elder of Beacon Keep was ordained by the Didact himself when he awakened the Forerunner on his own world of Requiem. In the monthly cycles that followed, however, many began to question Unggoy's right to bear the mantle of leadership. One such dissenter was Salih Neon, who proclaimed himself the True Hand. This led to a violent confrontation between the two warlords, ending with Unggoy's assassination and Neon planning on the fortress world of Okalspan. A less well-known mantle amongst these warlords was that of Worldmaster. This vainglorious title was worn by Nazat Kevarosi, a formerly disgraced fleetmaster during the early cycles of the war, as he now styled himself as the self-proclaimed ruler of Mba, a hellish world that the Arbiter had only just recently returned from. I am told that he and his fallen steward were grievously wounded when they resisted Vadam's entreaties. Without any proper medical care, they are sure to have perished by now. Thus ends the reign of the Worldmaster. Beyond the ranks of the Covenant and its splinter states, we Sangheili have many other places of prominence in our society, and it might serve your envoys well to know them. From childhood, Sangheili males were raised for military service, a reality that would largely dominate the bulk of their lives. Females were also trained, but for the protection of home and nest, not on the battlefield. The identity of their fathers is kept from Sangheili children so that they would not rest in the legacy of their forebears, but raised by the entire keep, each would fight to prove their own worth. Trained from an early age to engage in hand-to-hand combat and use all manner of weaponry, our kind represents the sharpest edge of military prowess. But the most infamous of station a Sangheili could gain is the Oath Warden. Oath Wardens are little better than mercenaries, ruthless bounty hunters who sold their services to enforce broken agreements. They are talented investigators and tireless stalkers who always deliver satisfaction, or by delivering their severed heads to the injured party. Oath Wardens follow a code that prohibits them from being contracted as outright assassins. But it is possible for a shrewd contractor to persuade a warden the severity of the broken agreement that would merit such a conclusion. No self-respecting warrior would barter with such. They are lower than rats. The study masters, however, are a far more distinguished post within the keep. They are scholars, researchers, and masters at any great matter of knowledge. It is through their wisdom that shapes the course of a leader's path. After them are the artisan armorers. These are skilled craftsmen who shape and craft weapons and vehicles. In the days of the Covenant, they once operated the Empire's vast assembly forges and maintained design patterns. They still thrive to this day, even without the guidance of the Sangshum. Sangheili artisans and architects take much of their inspiration from nature, both in the structures they raised from the ground and the ships they take to the stars. One of the most ancient of orders that still exist to this day are the Aesthetic Guard. The Aesthetics are an ancient order of warriors with deep ties to ancient Sangheili beliefs, fervently devoted to their pre-Covenant faith. While their military forces were vastly diminished following the formation of the Covenant at the Writ of Union, Aesthetic priests continued to work secretly to initiate worthy Sangheili warriors into their ranks, keeping the ideals of their martial order alive within the Covenant. And following the hegemon's collapse, these warrior priests maintained closely connected to the Arbiter and the swords of Sanghelios through their envoy, the fearsome Uze Taham. His skills were honed by studying under his uncle, Toha Sumai, a blade master. Blade masters are well regarded in Sangheili society for their mastery as swordsmen. They're forbidden to marry, but they are allowed to mate with any females as they wish, so that their swordsman genes may endure the centuries. Blade masters are entitled to wear gilded armor, a sign denoting their master rank. After the war, many warriors of such renown have either joined the swords, returned to their own keeps, or worse, have enlisted into the ranks of the Banished. Within the keep of a Kaidan, their martial skills are always tested by rivals and assassins. Though they are expected to defend their own lives to prove their ability to rule, they are granted some amount of protection. In this way do the keep wards come into play. In many ways, they were much like the honor guards of old, for it was the keep wards who were tasked with maintaining the safety of a region's Kaidan. Within the governance of a Sangheili province, the title of Elder is an important one. Elders are part of the local Sangheili government, assisting the Kaidan in governing the state. They would confer in a hall or assembly house within the keep. An elder is given control over his own keep in the state. It was a council of elders who oversaw the Kaidan's affairs and helped him make decisions or elect a new Kaidan. If a member of this assembly has second thoughts on the matter, It is considered traditional to send an assassin to kill the Kaidan in order to test his true merits as a ruler. But if the Kaidan emerges triumphant, he can put the Elder to death for his failure. In addition, the line of the Elder can also be put to death, but the Kaidan may spare them, but banish them from the keep. Within the Kaidan's own keep, his household has many notable offices that aid in the maintaining of their ancestral seats. The office of Keepmaster is one of these. They are castellans, running and maintaining the keep in the absence of the Kaidan. Some have been known to outlive their lieges, continuing to serve their successors as ably as they did their predecessors. Another important office in a Kaidan's own keep are the Scions. Typically held by Sangheili females, the role of Scion is most often granted in the event of a Kaidan's death. If the Scion is the only remaining living member of the house, lesser Kaidans will vie for the Scion's inheritance by attempting to secure her hand in marriage, though they have been known to prolonging such suitors for cycles. They are privy to their own personal harnesses in the event of battle. As the Arbiter has grown in influence, the Scion has become an increasingly respected and valued position across Sangheili society. The highest position within a keep that is second only to the Kaidan are their matriarchs. These females are the mistresses of their keep and the rulers of their Kaidan husbands. However, they may never become owners and the heirs to their father's lands and possessions. While it is true that the Kaidan is the supreme authority within the keep, the power and influence of the matriarch should not be underestimated. They are responsible for the dealings with familial and bloodline matters and the managing of the accounts of the keep. When the Kaidan goes off to make war upon his enemies, the matriarch is likewise responsible for the keep's affairs and wields authority equal to that of their lord husbands. But in the end, the rule of law within the walls of the keep lies in the hands of the Kaidan. They are the lords of their holdings as well as the leaders of the lesser keeps that fall under their jurisdiction. A Kaidan resides within a high room located at the center of the keep. While it has been noted previously that such Kaidans were traditionally elected by a council of elders, on far-fledged colonies, such rights were not so enforced. Instead, the mantle of Kaidan passes to the surviving son of the previous ruler. Such is the case on Ranello, a colony on the periphery of Sangheili territory. And in more recent cycles, certain Sangheili females along these colonies have risen to the Kaidanship, like the indomitable Olabisi Verodai, who has risen even higher in status in the aftermath of the Covenant's fall. Above the mantle of Kaidan is Marshal. Among the myriad of Kaidans, a Marshal is considered the first among equals. This ceremonial title is granted to a Kaidan who wields great power among their peers, both politically, economically, and militarily. They are most prominent on developed colony worlds of rich resources. But the highest office a Sangheili could achieve in the area of politics is that of the High Kaidan. They hold sway over larger territories, sometimes even entire colony worlds when they are still in development, with multiple Kaidans and marshals swearing their allegiance to the High Kaidan. The support of such leaders has long been sought after by the Arbiter and the Swords of Sanghelios, in the hope that his concert of worlds would soon come into fruition. But in bygone times, during the former age, another mantle reigned supreme over Sanghelios, the mantle of First Kaidan. As the War of Beginnings drew to a close, Those who bore such a title spoke for all of Sangheili and her people. It was held by Melet Olam, who sought to innovate Forerunner technologies to the Sangheili military, an act of extreme blasphemy that led to his assassination. His own son, Palasar the Strident, saw his father's vision come into fruition, and when that proved effective against the might of the Dreadnought, he met with the Sanshum delegation and agreed to terms, leading to the formation of the Covenant. Yet for all their grandeur and splendor, these titles pale in comparison to that of the Arbiter, a title and role of immense significance to the Sangheili people and their culture. In ancient times, Arbiters were Judge King warriors who ruled over their regions and keeps, inspiring loyalty and service in both the great halls of Sangheili as well on the battlefield. Within the Covenant, the role of Arbiter was twisted by the Sanshum, who would bestow the title upon a Sangheili warrior seeking redemption. A redemption they would have to earn by embarking on holy suicide missions to benefit the glory of the Empire. This was done after the Arbiter, Fal Chavami, rebelled against the Covenant and the High Prophets. And thus, the High Prophets created the line of Immaculate Succession. Contemporary arbiters of this line were selected by the hierarchs and specifically called upon during an hour of extreme need, or to dispense with a troublesome dissident. Each of these arbiters would be sent on hopeless missions to not only repay the Empire for their own transgressions, but to earn forgiveness for their sins and the reinstatement of their family's honor upon their death. But when the hegemony fell under the weight of the Prophet's lies, the title regained much of the pride and honor it had lost in the centuries during the Covenant's rule. Though it would never again be a return to the days of the old Judge Kings, it is the closest thing we Sangheili have to a supreme leader. The present occupant of this great office is none other than Thel 'Vadam, Slayer of Truth, and the Kaidan of Unity. Last, and certainly least of the species of the Covenant, were that of its rulers, the Sanshum. Known to most as the Prophets, the Sanshum were the self-anointed leaders of the old Covenant Empire. It was they who instigated the long and terrible War of Annihilation, and while they had no official standing within the Covenant's own military, under the veil of piety, they governed the hegemony through shrewd, calculating machinations. In the time of the former age, the first Sanshum to call themselves prophets were known as the Keepers of the Dawn, acting as the spiritual leaders of the exiled reformists when they fled their homeland after the War of Wills. It was at their command that the War of Beginnings dragged on for decades, under the leadership of a tyrannical Sanshum named Pervading Stone. Yet after his dispossession, the Sanshum and Sangheili met and signed the Writ of Union, leading to the formation of the Covenant. As per the terms of the writ, the prophets were placed in charge of all political and scientific endeavors, while the Sangheili held dominance over the military. But it was through their mastery of science that led them to create their own breed of warriors, the Prelates. Hidden in the shadows of the Sanshum's machinations, well out of the sight of most of the Covenant's members, the Prelates were genetically enhanced Sanshum super soldiers who directly served the hierarchs as assassins and escort details. Every initiate was reshaped, mind and body, by the Ministry of Preparation, using ancient Forerunner gene forges hidden within the secreted depths of High Charity. Any detailed records regarding their origins were lost when the city fell prey to the parasite. but the prelates have existed for centuries as an advanced order of stewards. Their forms have changed over time. The most recent one of late development was inspired by the High Prophet of Truth's unsanctioned work within the Sacred Promissory, based in some part by your own Spartans. They were the only Sanshum to have ever served in the Covenant's military, for they were no true warriors. Their thin, weak bodies were of no use in combat. Their acumen lay in the political arena on high charity. Within a given ministry, the junior and senior staffers were the first steps on a Sanshum's path to power. Like most of their species, staffers sat upon gravity chairs due to their physical weaknesses, though theirs are less than their betters. It was they who investigated all ministry matters and offer solutions to problems relating to their respective ministries. But disagreeing or arguing with one's superiors would often lead to the impediment of a Sanshum's career. Above them are the Churgeons, assigned to the Ministry of Preparation. It was they who molded the prelates into a fighting force they were renowned for. Churgeons were also dedicated to unlocking the secrets locked away within the Forerunner keyship, the Dreadnought. They would be found among agricultural support ships within a given fleet, should the Supreme Commander have need of such. Another post a Sanshum would claim was that of stewards. They once acted as servants, advisors, and even bodyguards should the situation demand it, to high-ranking individuals such as fleet masters, or high lords, or even a hierarch. Their origins can be traced back to the founding of the Covenant during the War of Beginnings, and would continue to be in use until the Covenant was torn asunder. Beyond simple ministry labor are those of political power that many Sanshum hope to gain. A position for a prophet in lesser office was that of secondary administrator. Those who obtained this rank served as a buffer between the hierarchs and others seeking an audience. They would likewise serve the high prophets in any matter they saw fit. A singular honor. But in truth, it was little more than a glorified doorkeeper, an office that held little hope for advancement, save for espionage and blackmailing. But the first true steps towards power is when one becomes a minor prophet. These were religious officials appointed to a ministry-sponsored fleet to serve their fleet masters as advisors in all matters of faith. Whenever a discovery of great religious significance is made, they could assume command of the fleet's assets in the name of the Great Journey. But these steps led to a violent power struggle between them and their fleet masters and supreme commanders. Those who served ably as administrators may gain the office of Prelate of High Charity, not to be confused with the Prelates of the Ministry of Preparation. This post was similar to what you humans would call a mayor. They would manage the day-to-day governance of the Holy City, while the High Council dealt with more important matters. The clerics were of likewise importance to the Sanshum, though the details of such are lost. What is known is that the clerics and vice-clerics dealt with all the spiritual matters of the Holy City, as well as medical. But the most significant religious office in the Covenant was Philologist. They led the aesthetic priest aboard the Dreadnought. Their first duty is tending to the care of the oracle within the Dreadnought and interpreting its will. But in time, they grew to become kingmakers. Whenever a trio of Sanshum wished to ascend the hierarchy, they would need the blessing of an oracle. As the machine was dormant, it became necessary to secure the support of the Philologist. This was done through bribery and blackmail. The eldest of the last hierarchs, the Prophet of Mercy, was himself a philologist prior to his ascension. Returning to the political arena of the Sanshum, we have the title of High Lord, a rank that predates the Covenant. As members of the Sanshum nobility, High Lords were expected to use anti-gravity chairs for transportation and comfort. Within the Holy City, they would reside within the compartments of comfort. Those born of lower caste broods were destined to serve High Lords as stewards and bodyguards. Yet for all their grandeur, under the rule of the Covenant, additional titles such as ministers and vice-ministers held more authority than that of High Lords. Vice-minister was an office within the Covenant ministries, serving as a deputy to their minister. The vice-minister aided their ministers in all their duties, even taking their place on the High Council, should the need arise. Ministers, however, are another matter. They were the heads of a given ministry. Ministries carried out the edicts handed down by the council, but in practice were effectively independent. Ministries were assigned control over specific secular and religious activities, yet a broad amount of overlap in authorities and spheres of influence generated competition and infighting, which ironically helped the hierarchs maintain control. There were hundreds of ministries by the end of the Covenant, some of which existed only to keep the ambitious members of the High Council busy. Whenever a minister proves incompetent or unable to fulfill his duties, they are forced aside. But for ministers who prove themselves in politics, they would be ordained as a High Counselor. The day-to-day operations of the Covenant was the responsibility of the High Council, several hundred Sanshum and Sangheili representatives ruling from the halls of their sacred chamber, deep within High Charity, both founding species given a stake in the Empire's governance. Although the three High Prophets held broad control over policymaking, it was the High Council who effectively governed the Covenant by invoking legislation through a complex array of lesser councils, ministries, assemblies, and conclaves. But it was the triumvirate of three Sanshayum who governed from the height of all authority, the Hierarchs. Also known as High Prophets, they exercised decisive, near-absolute control over the entire Covenant on behalf of the gods. The appointment of this triumvirate signaled the beginning of a new age in Covenant history, and was only possible in the event of a former hierarch died, or in a rare prophecy that was offered by the Dreadnought's Oracle. When the High Council approved a new triumvirate, a sacred ceremony, known as the Ascension, would occur where the hierarchs were formally installed, often leading to the selection of a new self-appointed names befitting their station. And it is not unheard of for a female Sanshayum to rise to this holy office. Such was the case for the High Prophetess of Obligation, one of the High Prophets who had preceded the last triumvirate who led the Covenant in the War of Annihilation. And those High Prophets were Truth, Mercy, and Regret. With that, this debriefing is now at an end. I pray the information provided proves useful in the fights that are sure to come. The trials ahead seem very grim, but we will endure, we will fight, and we will persevere. Victory to clan and kin humans. Nakai Vodar, out.